Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special video of the Hack Your Gut podcast. Today, we're going to be talking with Graeme Jones, clinical physiologist and CEO of Nordic Clinics in Stockholm. Before we get to that, I just want to cover some little accounting things. A lot of you are probably members of my private Facebook group at Hack Your Gut. And I'm actually going to transition this. I'm either going to transition it to a public page or I'm going to scrap it all together and start a public page. That's simply because the way I want to help people. I really want to be able to do Facebook Live videos and such and have a lot more interaction, do Ask Me Anythings. And I can't really do that properly from a private group because I can't really share that with other people. So if you are a member of the private group, please like the page. In the near future, I'm going to probably shut off commenting in the private group and then transition people from the page to a separate group that will be public. I would ideally prefer to do that. I have a lot more members in that group than I have likes on the page, so it would be a lot easier if you could all just like the page and we can move on from there and start the public group. It would be very useful for you guys. I do think the Facebook Live concept works a lot better and is a lot more helpful for people to ask questions. Just a note for that, when that page does become public, do not share your personal medical information on it. Simply, probably what I'll be doing is asking people to send me questions anonymously and then I'll go over them. So having said that, without further ado, we have Graeme here with us today. How's it going, Graeme?
Good, thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Yes, nice chatting with you again. We've met, I guess we kind of been talking with each other probably around 18 months or so on the internet through Facebook Messenger. We've done a couple of video calls. We got a couple of calls as well. And we're just kind of discussing things that you use in your clinic. We have a very similar approach. I don't think that approach has made its way here to the United States. I do believe that that approach will it'll probably take a long time to get here. It's probably going to have to be better established in areas like where you're working in Stockholm. And so just tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of what you do at Nordic Clinics in Stockholm.
Yeah, sure. So my background really is in preventative medicine. So I started to work with Nuffield Hospitals, which is a large chain of hospitals in the UK. And Nuffield decided they were going to change medical screening and actually include some preventative parts to those medical screening assessments. So my kind of journey into lifestyle and functional medicine was really thanks to a bunch of intelligent people at Nuffield Hospitals who really saw the value in changing the market more to a preventative healthcare factor. So I started working with them. I ran one of the busiest medical screening departments outside of London on the south coast of the UK. Had a team of doctors and other physiologists. And basically we screened people for disease. So if we found anything, there was a diagnosis given, and then we also ran a bunch of additional tests that predicted risk of disease, like using heart rate variability analysis. And also we talked to patients about their lifestyle. What do you eat? How do you sleep? How stressed are you? And we combine that all in the assessment. So really, that was when I started to really combine, the medical side with the lifestyle and nutrition and exercise and all of that. And then it really grew from there, and I went to work in Harley Street in London, and I worked with some really talented chronic pain specialists, John Boskill and his clinic, and we had a real huge interdisciplinary team from neurosurgeons to psychologists to physiotherapists. So mainly dealing with chronic pain, where I worked on the functional medicine side of things. And then I've worked for a parasitology laboratory, and then I've worked for Nordic Laboratories for a number of years. So dealt a lot with different kinds of tests, and trying to understand how does laboratory science work and which are the best labs around the world and what's their what's their stability times like, and reproducibility and accuracy, and then really try to pull all of that information together in what I'm doing now. So now I have a team of roughly 11 people, a number of medical doctors, a couple of researchers, some health coaches, some nutritional therapists, 2 nurses, and we basically try and work as a team to help patients who have the typical chronic conditions that we see a lot of, some unique conditions, and then also we're doing some research. So we're trying to show that functional medicine works and preventative medicine works and lifestyle works. So we're doing a longitudinal observational study at the clinic. Also, I'm getting involved with some of the large Swedish organizations like Karolinska, where we're actually doing some research on 20 the toughest IBS patients in the country that don't respond to the classic therapy or interventions, and can we use functional medicine and lifestyle and nutrition and all of that to actually get them better. So really my day-to-day work is running the team, seeing some patients, strategizing for a lot of the difficult cases that we see, which range from IBS to Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, to type 2 diabetes, a whole range of different conditions, depression, and and also some very unusual things where we have to combine all the expertise we have in the team, from the researchers to the doctors, nurse, nutritional therapists, myself, to try and see if we can improve outcomes.
So how long have you guys been, has Nordic Clinic been in business?
Well, Nordic Clinic, it started in Copenhagen, and it's been running in Copenhagen for around 15 years.
Oh, wow.
But Nordic Clinic Stockholm has been here almost 2 years. Then we also have a Nordic Clinic in Helsinki, and we have a Nordic Clinic in Porto as well. And each of these clinics have a different range of expertise and doctors. So we really have quite a nice group of practitioners where we're all talking and we all bring different things to the table, to try and understand how do we solve some of these chronic health conditions that generally don't kill people quickly, but they hugely affect quality of life over time. And what can we be doing, especially with nutrition and lifestyle behavior, as well as medication and things like supplements, and how do we combine all that together to get the best outcome for the patient?
Yeah, that's great. The team approach, I mean, that's with some of these much more difficult cases, and chronic disease in general, because they generally cluster together. I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show House, but they have a team and they have their individual specialists. And in the same way, that seems to me like the better approach for this, because there's no way you're going to sit with a doctor who's spent 8 years learning even the traditional medicine paradigm. They're not going to have time to learn about nutrition and circadian rhythms and exercise. And so you really do need to have a team. And unfortunately, from my perspective, what I end up seeing is, for most people, that team involves their primary healthcare physician and maybe a dietitian. But for the most part, they're kind of outsourcing a lot of the stuff to social media. I follow a lot of different professionals on Twitter, and just a kind of a great example of that is the restriction diets that people use for GI problems. There's a proper protocol for using those. For example, FODMAP restriction. It's FODMAP restriction, FODMAP reintroduction, and then FODMAP personalization. but you don't really get that full continuum online. You just hear bad FODMAPs, avoid FODMAPs. So you have people avoiding all this fiber, and which is very bad for your gut over the long term. You're not going to get that with a primary care physician and then possibly a gastroenterologist. You're going to need this team of health coaches, physical therapists, and or personal trainers who can work on things like breathing and such, and dietitians, and somebody who may, generally the health coach will probably work on the things like meal frequency, meal spacing, and things like chrononutrition and stuff. So now you've mentioned that you mentioned a couple of times IBS, and in our discussions you've mentioned how that just seems to be what you guys get because you've just had a tremendous amount of success about it. So using, IBS or, other gastrointestinal problems, since this is a Hack Your Gut podcast, kind of go over what your health paradigm is. You kind of went over it, but somebody comes to see you, I assume there's some testing, and then there's some way that you kind of blend symptom management with addressing the actual problem. Just kind of run through that with me.
Yeah, well, you're right. Patients will contact us. We generally get a 32-page questionnaire from them before they've even come to the clinic. So we send that out. That's a digital questionnaire that they complete online, and it comes back to us. So even before we're seeing them in person, we generally have some kind of idea about what we want to do with them, or at least areas where we're going to ask more questions about. So we really like to do our homework. That also saves a lot of time in the first consultation, like going over history and dates, and we get a full timeline spread of exactly when things happened over the person's life. So then we can possibly put things together. We can add a bigger picture. We can explain back to the patient why we think this may have happened or may be happening. And that's always nice for patients to understand possible links. And then what we do is we ask a bunch of questions. We probe into certain areas. We put forward certain theories. Like we think your IBS really sounds like SIBO is the main component, or we may put forward another theory, dysbiosis, or we think it could be more inflammatory and that needs to be ruled out if it hasn't done already. And then we typically offer the patient, if we don't think it's a medical emergency and they need to go for a colonoscopy, for an example, then we offer the patient, we go, well, here's kind of 3 different levels. You have these things, they're usually lifestyle related. So we get into all the circadian rhythm side of things, meal timing, feeding and fasting cycles, certain food choices, timing of exercise, stress management. And we say, here's the things that we can see that are free, that you need to optimize. You need to work on this stuff. And that genuinely could make a huge difference. And we may not need to go into testing. But then we also might say, well, we've got the whole lifestyle side of things. We want you to change this and that. And also then we want to run this test. And that might be a pathogen profile where we're looking for parasites and different bacteria, fungi, and just how the pancreas and gallbladder is working, along with things like calprotectin levels. And we may offer additional tests, basically heart rate variability with a Holter monitor over 5 days, or we may be wanting to look at thyroid markers. We're just trying to evaluate that patient in a very wide perspective, and then go, well, here's the theories of what could be causing this based on the information we have and how you've answered our questions and your symptomology. And here's like the different levels that we could go into with you. And then we generally like the patient to buy into one of those levels, of course, and say, yeah, they might say, all I'm prepared to do right now is change my lifestyle, or they might say, I want to do a test, or they might say, look, I want to rule as much out as possible, as quickly as possible, and then we may be doing microbiome analysis with SIBO, with intestinal permeability, with thyroid markers, with stress hormones, combining that with Fitbit or Oura Ring data, genetics. It's really, it really depends. We're trying to strike a balance between getting the clinical information we want that's going to help to create the best strategy. We don't want to do anything that is unnecessarily using money of the patients that doesn't need to be used. So we have this very open conversation about, well, here's all the things it could be based on what we've talked about and your symptoms. Here's what we need to rule out. Here's where we'd like to start, but also there's these other areas as well that could be involved. And then sometimes we go through a long process of elimination. And like say, sometimes patients might do 3 or 4 tests at once, and then we get all that information back and then create an action plan of treatment and behavior and nutrition changes from there. It really depends. Every patient is different. Some patients want treatment in different ways. So we generally go out a lot with and say, here's the options that we can see. But a very clear thing is that the behavior and lifestyle is so important. And we're often, with every patient, we say, here's the short-term symptom management stuff that you can do, or we can see that will be helpful from your test results. But here's the things that you need to be doing every day, and probably we're not going to get long-term results unless you're doing this stuff. Otherwise, you're just going to get into a cycle of using whatever it is to consistently manage your symptoms. And really, we want patients to have the tools to manage their health long-term.
Yeah, so when you're saying the symptom management, you're kind of referring to like supplements, pharmaceuticals, or things of that nature, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we do a SIBO breath test and it's positive and the patient has IBS, then we can say, well, here's the different ways we can treat it, but this is only going to be symptom management in the short term. So you can do the elemental diet, or we could use herbal therapy, or we could use rifaximin and with neomycin. It depends on the type of SIBO it is. But if the patient has what looks like from the results and the evidence a slow migrating motor complex that is what we think is causing, or one of the causes of the SIBO, we can treat that. That SIBO will go away. It's easily treatable, but then it's just going to come back. So if we haven't worked on stimulating that migrating motor complex through feeding and fasting, circadian rhythms, for example, or increasing vagal tone in general and increasing heart rate variability, then all that's going to happen is probably in whatever it is, 1 week or 1 month or 3 months, the patient's going to come back and go, I felt great, but now my symptoms are back and I need more treatment. So we generally now we have that experience where we can say, look, this is specifically to SIBO, we think this is going to be this many treatments, but whilst we're doing those treatments, you're going to have to be implementing all of this lifestyle side of things. And if you're not doing that, then this is probably, it's not going to get better. You're just going to cycle around in treatment all the time.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I see the most, at least following social media. I mean, you have to keep in mind when you're kind of on social media, you realize you're generally going to get the people that are having problems with something. Just like people don't typically call customer service to say you're doing an awesome job. They typically call to say, hey, my TV screwed up. What did you do? So
Yeah.
I see people that just, they keep, this constant deal of, like, you'll see them one week, yes, SIBO's gone. And then, a year later, SIBO's back. And I just think that that seems to be very, very common here in the United States, at least, in that people do get the symptomatic relief from taking whatever, whether it be Xivaxin or whatever, and then but ultimately they end up coming back. Now that kind of brings us to a nice little segue, because one of the most interesting things I kind of got from you in talking with you is that you say that it's a much tougher nut to crack in Sweden compared to the United States and Britain, in that most of the Swedes will do the lifestyle stuff anyway. Whereas here in the United States, I've never been to the UK, but the way you explained it to me is that the poor food environment is much more rampant there. So just kind of discuss that with me and what you've seen with regard to that. I know you were just on vacation in the UK and you were kind of telling me what you were seeing.
Yeah, well, I think having lived and worked in London for many years, when we were getting patients who were having a variety of issues, it was generally, you're asking them about what they're doing, and they have like zero work-life balance. They're working all hours in the week. They're not sleeping very well. They're usually on a number of medications to try and help their sleep or control anxiety. There was a lot of alcohol. There was, generally no routine with food, or it was a lot of fast food, poor food choices, a lot of simple sugars, or, a lot of like poor quality, saturated fats, things like that. And just then generally either killing themselves on the weekend with exercise, classic like weekend warrior, or not doing anything at all. And that's very different in Sweden. People generally have some kind of quite a nice work-life balance. Fast food is not as prevalent here. Generally, patients will be having quite a number of portions of vegetables per day. They have reasonable routines. They are moving most days, are getting good levels of steps. So it's slightly different. In the UK, I used to have to do a lot of just general lifestyle coaching. Certainly in the beginning with patients, whereas in Sweden tend to get into testing a lot sooner, because they're often doing a lot of the basics. A lot of our patients have done a lot of research on their own condition. They might already be doing low FODMAPs, for example, or tried some of the different diets like AIP, etc. So then for us, it's more about using the testing and actually finding the problem, or multiple problems, and then it's more about just us like doing little optimization tweaks with live timing of light or exercise, really getting them on a bit more of a consistent plan, rather than them just trying these 5 different supplements and these 5 different diets. Then we can give them the evidence and say, here's what we can see. Therefore, yes, this way of eating is right for you temporarily while we correct it. Or, yes, we want you on this kind of intermittent fasting, 16-8 routine, and here's why. Then we can explain much more and actually demonstrate, well, yes, we need this supplement because of this, or and so that's the difference. Generally, UK, I found it was much more lifestyle coaching, just explaining that probably that sugared cereal is not necessarily the best start to the day. Whereas, Sweden have less of that going on.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I started digging, I mean, it's kind of mirrors what I've seen. I've worked with a lot of people with type 2 diabetes, and generally speaking, most people who are kind of entering that, or kind of on the cusp from pre-diabetes, they're easy to kind of turn around because they literally have the lowest hanging fruit right there.
Yeah.
It's not that they're not getting exercise at the proper times. It's that they're just not getting the appropriate level of physical activity. Just kind of, a lot of people have heard, you should get 10,000 steps a day. Well, 10,000 steps a day is a good start. I don't think that's the ideal amount of steps. I do think it's a lot, not a lot more, like 20 to 50% higher than that. But when you get somebody who comes in and they're getting, like, I've had people put on a Fitbit or an Oura ring, I just say, go wear this. And then the next day they come back, there's something wrong with this thing. It's not working. It says I only got 3,000 steps. I'm like, well, the Fitbit's working, somebody else isn't working. And it's just really easy to help those people that are entering on the cusp. But then you get other people who have been, type 2 diabetic for much longer. Their, fasting numbers, postprandial numbers, A1C are all very, very high. And even bringing them to within, enough steps and kind of tightening their diet up enough, they're, working on light so they're sleeping a little better. There is another tier you can get to where you're really zoning in on the very specific times they're eating, the specific gaps in their meals, kind of layering when they're eating their carbohydrates versus when they're not. And, probably, if you follow the circadian stuff online, everybody has blue blocking glasses, but not a single person will go outside early on in the day and walk for an hour. One of the most frequent things I get asked in my program is, what type of light box should I use first thing in the morning? The best type of light box is to go outside and go for a walk. So I can think of no greater waste of time than sitting in front of a box and staring at it for an hour, especially because there's a substantial amount of evidence now that shows that physical activity actually trains the sensitivity of the master clock. So you're going to need to get it anyway. And instead of blocking things like light, food, exercise, you got to kind of weave them in together with one another rather than just completely separating them. So, and that's the big thing with glycemia. I don't really like saying type 2 diabetes. I don't like that term because really it's kind of referring to glycemic control, and glycemic control is a continuum. Type 2 diabetes is essentially thinking categorically, where you have categories. You have normal, pre-diabetes, and type 2 diabetes. But you don't need to be type 2 diabetic to get your blood glucose after a meal into the 200 or 300 milligram per deciliter range. It's actually quite easy to do that. It would take you maybe 2 or 3 days of physical inactivity and a Thanksgiving dinner to do that. And people think that that's benign. If I have a fasting blood glucose level of 99, I can do that to myself. But the truth of the matter is, a huge hyperglycemic response from a big meal is really going to cause damage to your gut. Not a big deal if you do it 1 to 4 times a year, but if you do that every single weekend or even more frequently, that's going to damage your gut whether you have type 2 diabetes or not. And it's really interesting. They've done kind of cell studies where they'll just expose cells to high levels of insulin, and there are substantially huge differences in genetic expression in those cells when you do that. And it doesn't just turn back once you remove the insulin. These seem to be, I don't want to say long-term meaning years, but it's going to last several days, if not several weeks or months when you do that.
Yeah.
And like here we have, it's oddly enough, I had a client who, she had this just 2 days ago. I know she's had fatty liver for a long time, and her fasting blood glucose levels are okay, but her A1C is bad, which is a clear indication that she's probably going very hyperglycemic after her meals. Doesn't want to go on metformin. She's one of these people that kind of sees pharmaceuticals and supplements as completely different. She had mentioned berberine, but I was kind of discussing with her, yes, berberine is as strong to some extent as metformin, but that doesn't mean that that's the proper way to do that. There are some negative consequences to long-term taking of berberine. They've shown that that can actually enhance the liver's ability to pull in fat, which you don't want to do if you have fatty liver. in the studies they've done on berberine with people with type 2 diabetes, those are maybe 4-month studies, but that's definitely, whether it's a pharmaceutical drug or a supplement, I don't think you want to use a supplement to manage a condition like that, because the longer you do it, the greater your risk of side effects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're using, whether it's medication or supplementation, I mean, then we'd want to try and use it for as little time as possible, enough that that patient can have brought all the lifestyle side of things in line. And of course, that can take it can take some time for some patients, many months or years even. Yes, I mean, berberine, we do use it in some cases, mainly for SIBO, but particularly if we have like a SIBO patient who has high A1C scores or like borderline high, then my preferred choice would be to use berberine in that treatment, because maybe we're going to get two different effects going on, but while they get the education about moving and sleeping and stress management and feeding, fasting cycles, and then actually what to eat when they are eating, and we want to try and get all those in place as quickly as possible then to actually stop using the berberine.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I often get accused in my group, in my page, of being anti-supplement or anti-pharmaceutical. I'm neither one of those things. And in fact, thanks to a test we did, which we'll probably discuss maybe at another time, I realized I was doing significant alcohol-induced damage to both my stomach and my small intestine. So I am currently taking berberine to kind of fix that. It seems to be specifically good for addressing alcohol-induced damage and in the stomach and the small intestine. So I'm about 2 or 3 weeks into a 4-month deal with that. And again, the problem, say, for fatty liver is that the liver doesn't really metabolize fat that well. So if you're just chronically overfeeding fat and taking berberine, that's kind of the issue. That could be the situation where you get, an increase of fatty liver from berberine. If you're managing the lifestyle stuff and you're using that as your primary means, your liver is going to metabolize fat perfectly fine. So taking berberine isn't going to have as much of a negative effect for that person. But yeah, and I have to put myself in this camp. In my 20s and early 30s, I used a ton of supplements in a completely different way than I use them now. I use them to kind of offset a crappy diet. I tried the fat burners, the ephedrine, caffeine, aspirin stack, and all these different things. Now I use them to, I'm not going to eat 20 beets in a day. So maybe I'd like to get a little more betaine than I could get in my diet. I want to get a little more this or that from my diet, but I'm not going to eat so much, spinach and beets. So it's like exactly what it said. It's a supplement. It is something you use to get the last 5 or 10%. Or on the other hand, it's a therapeutic approach to address the problem for 3 or 4 months. That once, if I know a lot of the people I've talked with who have SIBO, asking them to walk 10,000 steps might not be an option, especially if they have IBSD at the same time, and they're just constantly triggered with this diarrhea. They're not going to go for a 30-minute walk unless, there's, a bathroom. So you really do absolutely need to manage these symptoms. If you have really bad SIBO bloating and you can't sleep because of it, you need to address that with a supplement or a pharmaceutical. But you're not going to cure SIBO or completely get rid of it and have it come back without addressing the lifestyle stuff as well.
Absolutely, I completely agree, and that's what we a lot of my meetings with patients and the doctors that I have in the team and that I'm teaching and that they are teaching their patients. This is what we say all the time, that these things, whether it's supplement or medication, it's a temporary plaster. It's going to help to control symptoms. It might help them push in the right direction. If they do have some kind of digestive infection, then we may absolutely need that antibiotic. And that there are, of course, some infections that that will only get better with antibiotics. But most of the patients that we see, the symptoms that they have they've occurred because of lifestyle discrepancies over many years, and you combine that with genetics, and then all the maybe emotional trauma, or stress-driven lifestyle, just sympathetic nervous system drive in general, and of course we have symptoms and problems, but the lifestyle has to be that's the thing I say, that's the ground. You have to get the foundations in place, and long-term results are only likely to happen when those things are in place. And we're going to use the medication or supplements or whatever it is in the short term to help move you in that direction. But really, you have to take responsibility for what you do in your day, and if you don't, then we can't help you.
Yeah, the especially like the heart rate variability stuff is incredibly useful for people, and even just the Fitbit. A lot of that stuff is quote unquote geared towards people who are trying to lose weight, but there's a lot more information you could get from that, or the Oura Ring, and a lot is made. I mean, primarily what I really like, I use a Fitbit Charge 2. What I really like about that is the information it gives you on sleep. And now a lot can be said, these are not super valid indicators of your sleep. This is not going into a hospital and having EEG leads put onto your head or anything like that. You're not going to diagnose a sleep condition with these things, but they're very useful to give you an idea of how well you're doing. And you can start with the simple stuff. When are you in bed and when are you getting out? If you're in bed for 8 hours, you're not probably going to be sleeping anywhere near 8 hours. And most people don't realize that. They think that I go to bed at 10 and I wake up at 6, so I'm getting 8 hours of sleep. It's probably closer to 6 hours and 50 minutes, maybe 6 hours and 40 minutes. And what's really cool is when you take all of that information and you weave it. For example, I kind of toy with a lot of different things, but stuff I just get from my Fitbit, my deep sleep goes up incrementally when I'm being physically active, and it goes down incrementally when I'm being sedentary. Even if I go and work out at the gym, if I'm not getting enough steps spread throughout the day, then I'm not going to have good sleep. And there was actually just a study published a few years ago where they kind of looked at the glycemic response in people who were either sedentary during the day, they went to the gym and exercised for an hour, or simply people who just got up for 90 seconds every 30 minutes and walked around. And the group who got up every 30 minutes for 90 seconds saw a 40% decrease in their glycemic response throughout the entire day, which was even better. You'd mentioned the weekend warriors, the people who think they're going to do nothing during the week and then, bite for 2 hours a day on the weekend. Those people don't do as well as people who just walk every single day, in my opinion, at the very least, because you can't control your blood sugar. Even if you exercise, just go to the gym, say, 5 days a week for an hour and a half, that's 7.5 hours out of an entire 168-hour week. You're not going to sit down for the rest of that time and really have good blood glucose control.
Yeah, exactly. And these are the things that we're telling our patients all the time. But some are quite away from that, and we're not expecting them to be perfect overnight. We have to pick the lowest hanging fruit first, the things that's going to be easiest for them to change, and then work on it, point by point. So every time they come in, always asking them, how are your steps? How active have you been? How's the sleep? How's your stress level been? All of these factors. What's your feeding, fasting routines been like? And they get used to that routine. So then they're prepared for those questions, and it's that. We can take hundreds of data points from blood tests to functional tests to, more invasive. We can do the hospital, like, sleep apnea tests or whatever it is. And we're not using things like the Oura Ring data or the Fitbit. We're not using that to diagnose anything. We're not claiming that, okay, this is the best measure of data there's ever been. We're just saying, look, this is a device that you can wear every day that's probably going to tell you, are you getting better or worse, or how are things fluctuating? We see a lot of our patients use it, and it's very, very helpful to reinforce, I'm doing these things, the numbers are getting better, therefore I'm going to keep doing them.
Yeah, that's the same thing here. I like I said, I love the Fitbits. Again, it's not diagnosing, but also what more often than not, people are like, hey, can you look at my test? And the test is like a GI maps test or an OAT test or even a comprehensive metabolic panel. What do you get that done every 6 months to a year? How could you possibly fine tune your routine based off of something you're not doing at least 3 times a week? Fitbit, Oura Ring, whatever, you can use that. That's everyday information that you can act on. Of course, with some people, you kind of got to sit them down and say, listen, don't freak out if you're used to getting 2 hours of REM sleep and then you register 150. It's not a big deal. This is just, since these things, they're not like laboratory tests, they can fluctuate a little bit. We really want to see the overall trend. So whether using heart rate variability or what have you, if you just see the general trend as going up over time, that's all you're looking for. You're not really necessarily concerned with a specific number, although we do give those numbers. Like maybe we want your root mean squared of successive differences of your heart rate variability to be above 50. Yeah, but if it's at 20, it's not going to be 50 tomorrow.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, we use a lot of those tests. We use, GI map. We're using whatever it is, GIFX, CSAP, OAT tests, all of these and more. We do much more in detail mitochondrial analysis, where we can look at mitochondrial clumping and numbers, and we can look at gating, and we can look at the magnesium and all of these factors. But it's still, when we get these really cool results back, I mean, we're looking at these trends and going, well, yes, the mitochondria are not doing what we'd expect them to do, but a lot of it comes down to the basics again. So the test is really helpful because it may give us a piece of information that really helps that person to feel better, where we can help to manage that shorter term. But it's still the lifestyle factors that all of whether it's a GI map or an OAT test or whatever it is, it still comes back down to a lot of these basic routines and behaviors. And like I say, if patients aren't, again, we don't expect every patient to be perfect. Life happens, things are going to get in the way, but it's like I see you write a lot about developing resilience, and that's something we're always teaching our patients. We want to develop your resilience as much as possible. So when that thing happens in your life that you can't control, or you want to, eat that pizza or drink some beer on the weekend, you know what? That's going to be okay. Your body can deal with that, and you're not going to get a lot of symptoms or pushback because of it. So it is about how can we develop resilience as much as possible. And I really like RMSSD as a general marker for resilience, and the higher that can be, usually the more resilient a patient is. And you see this in things like the ME/CFS group of patients, chronic fatigue, where a lot of the time those heart rate variability values can be low, and it only needs something small to push that even lower, and then trigger a bunch of symptoms where they can't get out of bed then for a day or two.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's we've kind of the way medicine has been in the past. It's bacterial infection, antibiotic that works against it, wipe it out, good to go. But these chronic conditions are really tough nuts to crack because there are a lot of things that can feed into them. And resilience generally does build you up. I mean, even just kind of if you have to go in for a surgery, somebody who's physically active and strong going into a surgery almost always has a better outcome than the same person, had they not been exercising. And that's simply just because, building up resilience builds up all of your systems, your immune system. You need to repair things. Certainly diet plays a big role in that because enormously. I've seen with people like I get a lot of clients, and then I'm like, my husband needs to have a knee surgery, wants to have it, da 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 da. So, well, make sure, wants to get a good outcome. He's in his 50s, so he's no spring chicken. Just make sure he tightens up on his diet when he's doing that. Obviously, everything the doctor tells you, stay off the leg, all that stuff you got to do. But you could cause some significant damage just doing things that you think that are completely benign, and more so if you aren't resilient. I can think of nothing. In my opinion, hyperglycemia and repeated bouts of hyperglycemia, even if it has nothing to do with type 2 diabetes, are extremely damaging to you. I do test my blood glucose, I've done A1C. I do want to do continuous glucose monitoring as well, because I do believe that will show up a lot of the things I've kind of noticed. In my later 20s, I was pre-diabetic, and I could tell when I was going hyperglycemic. I mean, your body temperature, it feels like it's raising like 20 degrees, but it's probably only about 0.75 degrees. And but it's just amazing how I could sit down and eat like 3 or 4 pieces of pizza and that would happen. Now that doesn't happen. It doesn't need to happen, because if I do that, I make sure that my muscles are empty and any excess glucose can just get dumped in there without the assistance of insulin.
Yeah. I mean, we use continuous glucose monitoring with not all patients, but some of them. And you'll be surprised where those levels come up. You think you're buying a healthy. I mean, I've done it on myself for a number of weeks, and I remember once I was like, I'd walked around in the city to purposely try and find, I was in a bit of a rush, and I thought, no, I'm not going to go for like the easiest thing that may not be the best option. I'd walked, extra far to get to this place where I thought I was going to get healthy food. And then I looked at my levels afterwards, and it was higher than it had been, the night before, where I'd eaten sushi and had like 2 glasses of wine with it. So sometimes you can be really shocked by how it affects those levels. And we also see differences in different patients. So some can have certain foods and they get a much more blunted response compared to others. So it's not always straightforward as well. We do see some variability, but a key thing, just blood sugar management, and also how stress affects that. So patients be like, why was this shooting up at this point in the day and I hadn't eaten anything? And be like, well, what was going on? Like, I was been in a meeting. Was it stressful? I'm like, well, there you go. There you go. Your body, physiology is changing to dump sugar, raise the blood sugar levels to get you ready to fight or flight. So it's often the cool things with like continuous glucose monitoring, and you can actually see how stress is immediately affecting the blood glucose level.
Yeah, it's amazing how multivariate that is. Stress, sleep, food and exercise are big. Physical activity and or exercise. The more muscle mass you have, the more glucose you're going to be able to dump into muscles, and the more empty they are because you're being physically active at the time, the more you can take in. But yeah, stress, sleep, all that stuff. And then, as you mentioned, the individual variability. I could eat 100 grams of carbohydrate from white rice sushi, and I'll have a normal oral glucose tolerance test. I could have a good sized sandwich with highly processed white bread. Same thing. I eat a bowl of oatmeal and I'm 30 points higher at the peak of my oral glucose tolerance test. It makes absolutely no sense. literally no fiber in the sushi, but for some reason, rolled oats just send my blood glucose levels like 30 points higher than they normally would, even if it's not, particularly a lot. I mean, obviously it's a lot easier to eat 100 grams of carbohydrates from sushi than it is to eat a bowl of oatmeal with 100 grams, but I don't even think it takes that much, maybe anywhere between 50 to 75. The profile is completely different. And whether I'm doing that in the morning, noon, or night, same deal. It's simple. I think everybody believes they're going to go on a keto diet and then their risk of diabetes is going to go to the bottom. But I offer to those people, eat a sandwich a few weeks in your keto diet and tell me what your blood glucose levels are doing. So, because unless you're going to be keto every day for the rest of your life, you're going to experience hyperglycemia.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these, whether it's keto or AIP or the carnivore diet, vegetarian or vegan, I mean, everyone has different reasons for doing these different diets, and I'm not there to tell people ethically what's right and just say, well, here's what we know and what we see. And a lot of some cases, if you have epilepsy, the ketogenic diet is probably something you're going to do for most of your life to help to control that condition. But we try and get people to a balance. We try and get a balance that's right for them, that enables them to do everything they want to do in their life and feel how they want to feel. Sometimes we may have to put them on, or we do put them on, a keto diet or a keto flex diet for a short period of time. But usually, especially certain diets, then we're getting GI map results when you have these patients do low FODMAP for so long. Then the colonic bacteria is just so depleted. So then we have to really question in long term, how is that affecting not only the digestive system in some other ways, but also things like short chain fatty acids and then the effect of those on the brain, etc. These are all great diets or approaches that can have merit, but you've got to have your clinical thinking and understanding of how your body works in place to know why you're doing it and how that's affecting everything, to really know that, okay, this is good for me in the long term.
Yeah, it's really just, I've basically, other than vegan, I've done every diet in the world. I'd say my diet is closer to, I eat meat, so I can't ever say it's really close to vegan. It's a lot closer to vegan than it has been in my youth. But the keto diet's a very useful tool. I see, let's take it outside of the epileptic, because, they kind of are, the people who kind of get into it from there are that's their option. And certainly there are people, what's her name? Michaela Peterson, who does it, Jordan Peterson's daughter, who does the carnivore diet. They're doing that stuff for symptom management, and that's all right. And you can't really criticize somebody who's had chronic bloating for years and years and years, not wanting to go off of that. But that being said, that doesn't mean that there aren't drawbacks to it. I think if you have a lot of weight to lose, a keto diet is a very good tool to get there. But I think you always have to have your eye on transitioning out of that eventually, simply because it's hard to say what the perfect diet is, and it's probably different for everybody. But generally speaking, for gut health, I think it's safe to say that a higher fiber diet is better for somebody who it doesn't have a negative impact on. Like I said, if you're in the process of having SIBO or some sort of, colonic overgrowth to the point where if you eat any fiber, you bloat up, completely separate situation. Saying here, the goal is to get you to a point where your symptoms are managed and then slowly build it up to, as you mentioned, and I mentioned earlier with, you start with a FODMAP elimination diet, then reintroduction, then a personalization. I think that's the ideal situation, but most people think, okay, FODMAPs give me symptoms, so I need them out of my diet for the rest of my life. And that's where you get into the situation where you mentioned, where, they do a GI test and it's like, oh my God, where are my bifidobacteria, or where are my butyrate producers are completely gone.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also, FODMAP can really, if you have SIBO, FODMAP's great, it can help control that. But then if you've not done anything to change that SIBO overgrowth, you've just removed the FODMAPs, which hasn't fed that bacteria for a while. That bacteria probably is going to survive and just be more resilient than you are. So often then many try and reintroduce it back and get symptoms again because they've not had the right treatment or they've not implemented the right lifestyle factors to get the migrating motor complex going, or they've not looked at their whole life, in enough, in that broader perspective. We may need a specialist like a gastroenterologist to treat that SIBO, but then you need someone thinking about, well, what are you eating and how you're moving and how you're sleeping and all of this other stuff, because like say, for these chronic conditions, they're multifactorial. There's plenty of evidence in the literature that shows that. So you've got to think about all those possibilities and then identify which of those ones for you that need changing. And that's what, this whole approach that we're trying to take is really find that individualized approach that's right for the right person. A lot of things, a lot of the basics, all the same advice, but then we can optimize it and tweak it in different ways and then treat the specifics on top of that.
Yeah, it's great. I don't think there's such thing as lifestyle is better or medicine is better. You need them both. It's like asking which of the four wheels on your car is most important. Well, the ones that you have are the most important, or the one that you don't have at the time is probably equally as important. You can't drive a car with 3 tires. It just doesn't happen. Not one is not more important than the other. You should be using all of the tools at your disposal to deal with this, because it is. I understand it's very, very, very difficult to get that type of bloating, or even with IBS-D, there's this whole cloud over you, like, when's it going to happen again? And the problem is thinking when's it going to happen again basically speeds up the process of when it is going to happen again.
Yeah.
So you don't just want to say, I'm just going to give the lifestyle part a shot. Now you want to use both. You absolutely may need some sort of antimicrobial to kind of, maybe not completely eliminate it, because some of the bacteria in SIBO you actually want to have, but get it down to get the numbers down to the point where you're asymptomatic, or they're right where they're supposed to be commensally, and not to the point where they're overgrowing and causing you problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So now I have a little part I want to do. Actually, before we get to that, I do want to say I eventually do want to get you back, as I mentioned. You have a really cool intestinal permeability test, and it's very interesting how it can kind of pinpoint where it's happening, what's happening. And the one interesting thing I found from that, without going into too much detail, is that I'm not lactose intolerant. I have had issues with lactose before, to where I believed it was lactose intolerance, but I think maybe probably improving my gut helped that. An additional factor might not have been that I'm lactose intolerant so much as that there's too much lactose in a McDonald's milkshake to digest than I could possibly ever hope to have the lactase enzyme. So during that unhealthy period of my life, it wasn't necessarily that I was lactose intolerant. It's that there's an upper limit to the amount of lactose you could consume. So I do want to talk to you, at another time about that intestinal permeability test and how it can point us in the right direction of where the problem is and how to treat. But for now, I want to end this off. Be mindful of your time and do a little lightning round. I have some words here. I'm not going to stick you to single word answers, because I think that that's not helpful to people if you have more than one word. But I'm going to say something, and I just want your response. Your response can be how you think it's treated, how you think it's caused. You don't really need to explain that per se, but just kind of what comes to your mind. So, you ready?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool.
The competitor in me is coming out now.
All right. Well, I'll get the stopwatch. Okay, here we go. Ready? And adrenal fatigue.
Oh, no. Horrible term, HPA axis dysfunction.
Yes. Chronic fatigue syndrome, or MECFS.
Multiple causes, but you've got to really consider. You've got to develop resilience and look for possible infections and mitochondrial dysfunction.
SIBO.
Migrating motor complex. Got to get that working.
Yep. GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease.
It's just, well, I think acid going into the wrong place. Really, for me, you've got to understand things that why is that acid going in a place that it shouldn't be.
Leaky gut.
Leaky gut, what can we say about that? Well, again, caused by so many different factors. It's like a dimmer switch, will go up and down. You want to do is, you probably want to, you've got to look at, again, all the lifestyle. Feeding, fasting routine, I think is primary there.
Okay, hyperglycemia.
Then I would say food choices and movement.
Okay, and finally, circadian rhythms.
Probably that's the number one thing to focus on, is just getting into a solid circadian rhythm. If you ignore that, you won't get better.
Cool. Thanks. Actually, before we go, I do have a question for you on that. This has just come up in one of my groups before. Have you ever kind of dealt with an instance where somebody has traveled from one time zone to another and then come back and kind of got stuck in the old time zone, for a prolonged period of time? Not just, everybody takes a while to adapt. My thinking is just, it would be more likely to happen in the young. But young people are super resilient, so it doesn't, just simply because, they're kind of geared towards being more towards the night owls. Have you ever dealt with a situation where someone's kind of gone overseas, come back, and then just never reacclimated to their normal time?
I've had it. I've probably had it. I've had it the other way. I've had it with patients who have moved overseas to where I am and just never have felt fantastic. They've never seemed like they and then they've moved back home, like maybe even 2 years later, and then suddenly all their health problems resolved. And I guess we could argue there could be multiple reasons for that, from family and safety and all of that stuff, but I've had it that way. And then I've also had one patient recently who just doesn't get affected by jet lag at all. Like, she could fly multiple time zones, be like, yeah, jet lag never affects me. But then she has a real problem with circadian rhythm. So then we're just trying to completely, really implement everything that you talk about all the time, about the movement, the morning trifecta, the dimming lights in the night, try and be active early in the day to really try and get her like physiology, biochemistry responding to, we've got to give her much stronger stimuli, and now it's starting to pay off. So, but that was an inch, because one of the things I said, I used this example about jet lag, and she was like, I never get jet lag. I can fly anywhere, multiple time zones, and be fine. So I was like, right, well, one of the things we're going to focus on is circadian rhythm.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? I mean, albeit that seems to be where I'm, like, kind of my wheelhouse and kind of what I'm working with people, what I'm reinforcing. I would love nothing more than to be able to fly overseas, or, party with my friends all night and wake up in the morning and pop a pill and be perfectly fine. I don't think that's ever going to happen. If it does, I may be one of the first to sign up for it. But yeah, it's unrealistic. It's really is a grind. But ultimately, the payoff at the end is really so worth it.
Yeah, it is. And you notice, I mean, it's like what we're always saying to our patients is, this stuff it's not a magic bullet. You're not going to feel better tomorrow. This is going to be slow, incremental improvements over time that we're going to see both in the data and how you feel. And you've just got to keep working at it, and you're going to get some setbacks. Life's going to happen, but you've just got to, keep going and keep going. You've got to develop that resilience. And that's really where we've found, and where I've had much more successful cases is those patients that can just really get those basic routines, all these basics that we talk about all the time: circadian rhythm, and then movement, sleep, etc., stress management. They just do better, because once you find the key things, if they do, if we do have a chronic fatigue patient, and there is evidence of some kind of chronic infection, and if we think there's enough evidence there to treat it, and we treat it, but they've been doing all of that stuff prior to it, then we generally see a better response. Or if we really have to try and boost the mitochondria in that way, all of that, it's whatever that is, people get better when they pay much more and consistent attention to the lifestyle behavioral stuff.
Yeah, that would almost be that magical pill, the type A changer. Something that puts somebody into a type A, and all of a sudden they have spreadsheets all over their entire house of, okay, I need to do this now, I need to do this now, I need to do this now. They do. It works so well. And it is, like you said, it's hard to put it in perspective, especially when somebody begins to feel better. Somebody could come to you and say, I've had diarrhea every single day for the past, 730 days. It's been 2 years, I have diarrhea every day. And they get to the point where they're having it once a week, and then they're having it, once a month. It's odd, even once you get adapted to that once a month situation, or even once every 3 months, it's frustrating when it happens, because you don't ever want to feel it. But, putting it in perspective, you're having diarrhea every single day, man. And now it's once, maybe a month. So then it becomes to the point where these people are doing the circadian stuff. One of the things I see the most, and it's just, it seems very intuitive now, when you think about it, but it has to do with people drinking alcohol and then drinking coffee the first thing in the morning, and then eating an hour and a half later. All three of those things affect colonic motility, and you're just doing this bang, bang, bang. There's no possible way in a short period of time that your colon's going to be able to kind of form the proper stool consistency. So then from there, you can have perfect circadian rhythms. Even if I do that, I know coffee the day immediately after drinking alcohol, and then eating a meal, 30 minutes after that, I'll guarantee you the same thing happens to me, and I've never had IBS.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, everyone, but people respond differently, and it's just most people aren't used to necessarily thinking about these things. They just, I was unlucky, I got IBD, or this IBS is just the way it is, and I'm gonna have to live with it. But we see plenty. There's so much clinical data and research data that really tell us a lot of these things are hugely impacted by lifestyle.
Yeah. Yep. Can't agree more. I'm just hoping you guys just keep pumping out, healed patients, and then word will get out, and we'll try to kind of import some of that group team healthcare, functional medicine over here in the States.
I mean, we try, but it is hard. Not everyone's in the right space to make all those changes. Like I say, some of the type A, like high achievers, they will do whatever it takes, and they can be very easy to work with, because you're like, yeah, do these 5, 6, 7, 8 things, and that probably they're going to come back in 2 months' time and they've done all of them. Yeah. But people have complicated lives. You've got to try and pick the quick wins to start with, and you can't, if you're not enjoying your job or your life situation, if there's, you're under a lot of emotional stress, then you can't out supplement those kind of things. You've got to consider all the, you're both emotional and, your mental, emotional, the physical factors, all of it.
Yeah.
So sometimes we say that to people as well, is that, look, we could give you these supplements and maybe that does something, but you need to think about, what are you doing in this area of your life? And we might not be the right ones to treat it. We're not psychologists, or we don't have all the answers, but we're just there to go, maybe you should think about this stuff as well.
Yeah, it's I don't think you could not emphasize the emotional component enough. Really, it shouldn't really be that surprising that the brain is connected to the rest of the body. And dealing with that stuff, even just looking at the HPA axis and all that stuff, your amygdala, your emotional center, has a direct line into that. So if you're emotionally all over the place, I'd have to say it's just impossible to heal.
Yeah. But it can also be, you can be emotional all over the place because, again, your lifestyle factors aren't in some kind of routine and process. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that if you're, emotionally don't feel on top of things, but then, physically you're not getting the right movement or sleep, and they feed into one another, and you've got to break that cycle somehow.
Yep.
And some, can go for therapy, and some, are able to make whatever it's the movement or the food changes or that stuff. Probably it's ideal to do a combination of the two. But this is the challenge we have clinically. It's quite hard to, really say to someone that, okay, if you change this area, it's going to contribute to a 30% improvement, or maybe that's worth 70%. We don't know. I mean, I've had things clinically that I think, this result is so significant, and then we might try and treat that directly, and it maybe gets 10 or 20% improvement. So that's the challenge, is really, how do we measure all of these things, and then how do we know what's going to make the biggest difference? And the answer is we don't know. So we have to just change, the low-hanging fruit first. We have to see what we find from the investigations. We treat what we find if there's evidence for it, and we think it's safe and it's the right decision, and then we see the outcome. Do things improve? Do symptoms get better? And if they don't, then we have to go on and start to rule out more and more things whilst they're still doing the basic lifestyle changes and improvements.
Yeah, it's excellent. And it's great to end off on that, because I feel a lot of the times we kind of get bound up into the supplements or lifestyle, exercise, diet and all that stuff, and then just kind of nobody addresses that the emotional part is, it's a critical factor. It's absolutely necessary. So you can't just really kind of gloss over that part.
Yeah. Well, I've seen, I can't remember who the research was by, but how just if we're looking at the mitochondria and the patient is in a happy mood when we're actually drawing the blood, then the mitochondrial scores are going to be better than if they're in a negative mood. So, there's some really interesting things like that's now we're starting to see in some of the research and thinking. But yeah, you could do your nicotinamide riboside or whatever it is, that can, give you that supplement that may help you feel better in the mitochondrial function. But if you're eating a ton of fast food and becoming hypoglycemic and have hugely high cortisol and poor sleeping patterns with no 10 minutes deep sleep, etc., then that mitochondria probably not going to get better.
Yeah.
And you're just buying a very expensive supplement to like kind of keep you going. And maybe that helps in the short term, but you got to get on those basics.
Yeah, or you'll crash. Maybe that's what we'll do on the next one. We'll kind of go over the testing, the intestinal permeability testing, and the mitochondrial testing. Maybe we'll pick a couple others. Why don't you tell everybody where they can get in contact with you, either via the web or what have you, if they see this and they kind of vibe with your approach.
Yeah, sure. I mean, probably easiest way is email. It's gjones@nordicgroup.eu. That's the easiest way. I mean, we do have a clinic website, but it's in Swedish. So probably unless you read Swedish, that's not going to be so easy. gjones@nordicgroup.eu or info@nordicclinic.se, and people can, the Swedes are fantastic at English. They all speak very fluently, so people can always send us an email in English. It's no problem.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been great. Learned quite a bit. I hope people have kind of taken a lot from this and, can motivate. And like I said, we'll get you back on. We'll talk about some of the testing and stuff.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Dave.
Great. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.